It was one of the first things out of the gate from the Trump administration, aggressively dismantling diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. Now, 1 year later, we're hearing from a group of scholars and community leaders who are watching this shifting landscape and see it as a shattering setback that threatens to roll back decades of historical progress. My colleague Eugene Daniel and I listened as they expressed deep concern over what they say is the erasing of mechanisms designed to correct systemic barriers. We listened as they explained why they believe DEI is being targeted. But we also heard from others who say it's time for DEI to die. We brought together this group of people to deliberate over a topic we hear so much about.
It is a conversation.
DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Words many say project strength, now being strangled by a narrative of division.
A lot of times individuals forget about accessibility.
When we talk about socioeconomic factors,
I don't want to dilute race,
including LGBTQ, veterans, youth.
These are experts who understand the meaning of DEI and say its purpose is being twisted, its promise mangled. What is diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Set of concepts and principles meant to inform policy, governmental practices and institutions and social institutions to correct racism, to correct bias, to correct discrimination, and to then usher in what we would consider and understand as people in this country to be fair.
Religion and culture and your sexual orientation and all of it is not something you see when you walk out the door. And so it is an attempt to embrace the intersectionality of it so people feel included but also feel like they belong.
the default for us, I think, is to go to race.
Yes.
Because that's the default. You know, you make it black and white, but there's so many other pieces to this.
I don't want to dilute race.
No, you can't.
I don't want to
You
dilute
can't.
race. I want to be clear.
No, you can't.
Yeah, right.
But that's our default.
But it's important to highlight the cross factor of DEI. Yeah, the cross factor, because when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're talking about language accessibility in many communities, but also we leave, I think, single parents out.
Accessibility is always key. It doesn't matter when. The ability to continue to live with accessibility, accommodations, and inclusion, I think, is what matters. And I'm so thankful we're having these conversations together so we can think about what it is and how we can grow, because in my mind, DEI is never stagnant.
Let me go back to Dr. Fairfax's comment about we cannot exclude race, though, because one of the things that my former superior, Secretary Julie Sue, always said as it concerned the Labor Department is when you can address the discrepancies in race, all other demographics under DEIA will be benefited because of that. Because from the very onset of the inception of this country, the system, the Constitution, was only signed by one demographic, and that was white men. We don't know if there were people with disabilities in the room. We don't know if there was another sexual orientation. But the perspective for which this country was built on was white men from the only lens of white, Christian, able-bodied men. Therefore, all systems are built on that, which the whole point was to keep the United States white and elite. And so a lot of the exclusionary factors of our systems started out with race, but it has also trickled down to other demographic groups.
I ended all of the lawless so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion bull.
So until we get to the place where we're all comfortable saying, I may not look like you, I may not come from the same place that you come from, but I do have the same opportunity to be successful. That's where the challenge is. And so President Trump is speaking to a base of people that largely don't understand that the very people that he's going against are people in their family that he's helping, that are being helped by DEI. You know, the person whose child at school needs an IEP plan. Just different things that people don't understand, because if you're going to just focus on that narrow window of Christian, heterosexual, male, healthy, because even a white male who's disabled doesn't fit that. Yeah. It's that narrow view that people want to hold on to.
What this group reads in the strokes of President Trump's executive order pen is in reality a movement to roll back hard-won progress. They hear echoes of backlash history has shown us before. Reconstruction in the late 1800s slapped back by Jim Crow. The civil rights movement met with opposition and attempts to stifle it. Roads to legal and social progress blocked by the traffic of fear.
America was on that path during Reconstruction. It was actually on that path right after the American Revolution. And each time we were on that path, we veered off because of fear. We veered off because some people, the majority, felt that they were going to lose their privileges, that they were going to have to share their space. They wanted to continue to exploit people through enslavement, through discrimination. And so they veered away from it, to the harm of our society.
We're in a time period now, when we look at our laws that are now being dismantled, this didn't happen overnight, okay? This was a plan in place from the first moment the Civil Rights Act was signed in '64, to start, how do we now roll this back? We look at what is happening now, which is being executed through the policies of the White House, the power. However, the policies were created through a think tank called the Heritage Foundation, which brought together over 100 different groups throughout the country with various ideologies in order to create what America used to be. And that is an America that is centered around white superiority.
What America used to be. In 1968, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Fair Housing Act, a critical civil rights achievement designed to ban discrimination in the sale, rental, and financing of housing. But as the legacy of housing discrimination lingers today, there's worry strides made in fair housing will erode, as just one example of DEI rollbacks.
There's still a lot of work to be done. And historically, both the government and private actors have had a role in enforcement. And what we're seeing, at least at the federal level, is the federal government kind of removing itself from its statutory role in enforcement of the Fair Housing Act.
Closely aligned with the Fair Housing Act is the Reconnecting Communities Act. Both are fundamentally rooted in advancing equity and justice, addressing systemic barriers that have limited opportunities and resources for marginalized groups. Today in Norfolk, Reconnecting Communities is working to identify a plan that directly tackles the social, racial, and economic consequences of the I-264 freeway construction and the highway's interaction with historic redlining in the city, an illegal practice denying financial services like loans to minority residents in certain neighborhoods. It contributed to the racial wealth gap we see today. On one side of the DEI argument,
redlining ended decades ago.
That's Mike Gonzalez with the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank and one of the leading anti-DEI voices.
But we cannot undo the awful effects of racial discrimination with more racial discrimination.
And on the other side of the argument,
so they redlined all of the communities that Blacks were living in and made those communities stay within those communities. When you look at the maps of that era that showed all the redlining, you also see that's where all the highways were placed. You see that's where all the major roadways were placed. you see that those communities that existed 40 years ago, 60 years ago are still there. And those highways are still there. And those public nuisances are still there. And you see the lack of resources that are going into those communities.
The highway ramps and interchanges were constructed to cut off public housing communities and poor neighborhoods from job centers, educational and transportation resources. Federal money today is being used to right that wrong.
There's still plenty of instances of discrimination that we see, sometimes still overt.
Although Norfolk's Reconnecting Communities funding is secure, other cities fighting the same battle can't say the same. Funds are being cut in the name of anti-DEI.
Unfairness, right, in the way homes are valued, people's access to credit. And there's, a lot of attack on that by the federal government right now. For instance, trying to limit, for instance, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act.
Ironically,
as soon as they would see our white faces, it was like, oh yeah, we can talk to these people.
Donald Trump and his father were sued by the U.S. Department of Justice in the 70s for violating the Fair Housing Act, accused of refusing to rent apartments they owned to African Americans. In this 2016 interview, Ellis James talked to us about being a tester in the case that involved a Norfolk apartment owned by the Trumps. He watched an African American couple get turned down, but not him.
When you walked into Oakdale, and then you connected the dots.
Yes.
You reported it to the FBI?
Yes.
The suit was settled with Donald Trump saying there was never an admission of guilt.
We still employ testers to do that kind of testing, and we still certainly come across a lot of discrimination.
For you, how does DEI shape what your work is in the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, and how do you use it when it comes to being a prosecutor here?
Diversity, equity, and inclusion are key to what it means to be American. And they are key to the work that we as prosecutors do to keep people safe and to make sure that there's one brand of justice for everybody, black or white, rich or poor, abled or otherwise, heterosexual or a member of the LGBTQ+ community. It is important for empathy, it is important for persuasion, and it is important for understanding. For empathy, we now know that even when we think we're not being biased, we are. Implicit bias is real.
When we hear anti-DEI voices, one word that always surfaces to the top:
merit. You should be hired based on merit.
Merit, the quality of being particularly worthy, deserving.
When you push for merit, but the historical reality is that so many non-merit factors like nepotism or the good old boys network have historically favored specific demographics.
Well, a company that relies on nepotism, on the good old boys network, if it's a public company, it's going to very rapidly lose market share, it's going to lose capitalization. It will not be able to compete with companies that hire on merit.
We believe that whether you are a doctor, an accountant, a lawyer, or an air traffic controller, you should be hired and promoted based on skill and competence, not race or gender. Very important.
Merit is based on assumptions. As a person with a disability, if I go into a job interview and say I have a significant physical disability, my resume has gotten me into the interview. You have seen in my resume something worth of merit to call me to an interview. But the minute you see a person with a disability who's coming in for a job interview, who may have a significant disability, merit goes out the window, even though my education, my resume says it. What is there is their assumptions. You're biased. There's a lack of knowledge. The disability community, we didn't get our civil rights until 1990 with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And if you say ADA today, a good percentage of the population think you're talking about the American Dental Association.
We paid a visit to the Independence Center, a disability advocacy facility, where they worry that anti-DEI policies will work to dismantle the structures designed to promote fairness, support, and a sense of belonging.
I help people who have communication barriers for the deaf and hard of hearing.
The majority of the staff that work here are people with disabilities. The one thing we don't ever want people to think is that we want a handout, and for that seems to be the misconception. We just want the access that everybody else has.
Jason Miara signed a letter to the president of Costco calling the retailer's DEI policies unlawful.
You criticize Costco, criticize the American Bar Association. 5.8% of attorneys in the country are Hispanic. Is that too many? What is your goal when you target DEI with the American Bar Association?
Well, listen, I am proud of the fact that I'm the first Latino to ever serve in this office as Attorney General and the first child of an immigrant ever served in this office. I want to see the full fabric of our community cross the economic finish line together. What I don't want is an America where somehow we're doing reverse discrimination against everyday Americans. I don't think that's healthy either.
One example AG Jason Miaras refers to is his investigation into the admissions policy at the elite Thomas Jefferson High in Alexandria, when he felt the policy went from merit-based to race-based.
And what we saw at Thomas Jefferson High School, in our conclusion, is you had anti-Asian discrimination that had occurred at this public school precisely because they were more interested in equality of outcomes rather than equality of opportunity.
After a federal appeals court ruled the argument lacked merit, the U.S. Supreme Court opted to leave the lower court's ruling in place. Still, in May, the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights opened an investigation into Fairfax County Public Schools over the policy. In the crosshairs of the DEI purge, colleges and universities.
The board had passed a resolution that DEI was going to be dismantled at the University of Virginia. I'm supportive of that. I think also there had been some expression of frustration from me and the board that it was moving too slowly. At the end of the day, and President Ryan did say this in his own resignation letter, that he had planned on resigning over the course of this summer. And he had planned on resigning in late July or early August, and he did it in late June.
Former UVA President Jim Ryan disputes Youngkin's account of his resignation. In a 12-page letter to the UVA faculty senators, Ryan outlines a politically charged controversy surrounding DEI compliance, which ultimately led to his forced resignation, comparing the ordeal to a hostage situation, while pointing fingers at lawyers at the Department of Justice, some board members, and Governor Youngkin.
Do you worry that when you have just 7% of students there, African American, maybe 6% Hispanic, that when you go after DEI aggressively, that those numbers will get even lower?
Our institutions are about academic opportunity. And anyone who is working hard and has demonstrated that they can succeed and in that environment deserves to be there. And I think that's the standard. Of course, what we have seen historically with a lot of the DEI programs is, in fact, illegal discrimination.
In 2015, I was appointed president of Virginia Wesleyan with a clear mandate for transformational change.
I would imagine that some university presidents would be afraid to talk about DEI. You're not.
I'm not.
Why?
This is my 35th year as a college president, and the issues of inclusivity have been a part of my background and experience for all 35 years as a college president. One of the things that attracted me to this campus was the diversity and inclusivity that's exhibited here and the potential to grow it. We don't have an office of DEI like you're hearing about at some institutions. Mm-hmm. We don't have it because inclusivity, diversity, equity, and inclusion are built into the DNA of Virginia Wesleyan, and we don't apologize for that.
We need to have the government and the private sector follow colorblind policies, especially because we're a multi-ethnic country.
Do you not like diversity?
Whether you're a current lawmaker or a former one, you have an opinion on DEI.
You know, if you understand our history, there are a lot of inequities in our society right now. Access to health care, access to education, access to the justice system, access to the banking industry. And so I ask myself, why is it that people are against DEI? And my simple answer is I think they're very frightened of losing their parking space. That's the bottom line.
Is it about maintaining the power hierarchy upon what this country was founded on?
In my mind.
I completely disagree with that. Because long before we had these new DEI programs that are sprung up, let's say in the last 5 or 10 years, we have made dramatic progress without these programs. And again, I would cite to you Brown v. Board of Education in 1954, and then the Civil Rights Act in 64, the Voting Rights Act in 65. These were based on, and again, largely at that time, largely white lawmakers and white Supreme Court justices changing the rules.
Hard work is good work. When you go down that route, you take mediocrity, and that's what they have right now as a vice president.
Are you suggesting she was a DEI hire?
100%. She was a DEI hire.
Propaganda is a serious drug. And so you believe certain lies, you believe certain non-fact-based beliefs that benefit the certain policies and benefit the country that you want. And so this means you have to be engaged in what is called the art of war. Means you have to demonize the enemy, demonize the other. You have to minimize, you have to marginalize the other. And so other people then don't deserve the goodness of the opportunities of America because they are low IQ, because they are stupid. We have had presidents, sitting presidents, to engage in cultural warfare by demonizing other people, engaging in propaganda so that policies are justifiable, right? To ensure that there are people who are locked out of resources, locked out of opportunity, locked out of equity.
The people who claim that that by including we are excluding, are looking to preserve waning power. Well, the future of the United States is a future that looks like us. It is a mixed future. It is a future where there are white people and black people, where there are Hispanic people. We're in Hampton Roads. We hear about our Filipino American brothers and sisters, the second biggest Filipino community in the United States. We hear about our South Asian community maybe once a year during India Fest. We are all here together. And the purpose of dividing us is because that leaves the largest single minority group in a position to maintain their control. And it is to pit us against each other.
You needed that job.
That argument played out in the infamous ad by North Carolina Republican Senator Jesse Helms that helped him defeat Charlotte's first black mayor, Harvey Gantt, in the 1990 Senate race.
But they had to give it to a minority because of a racial quota.
We need to make race less significant. We need to make race less, have less of an importance in our lives. But it's the side that wanted to have racial preferences, that wanted everything to be done with race, and now they're running around with their hair on fire saying, oh my God, they want to do race. Yeah, you begat this world, and now I'm trying to stop that world.
When people say we can't have reverse discrimination, and that's why we need to get rid of DEI policies, what do you say to that?
I don't believe there's any such thing as reverse discrimination. What I do is I look at what is the underlying argument? What is the underlying foundational thought or belief that you have? And what I see as the underlying belief is that unless there is assistance, white people are smarter than black people. or any person of color. And a male is smarter than a female. And so unless they have help, they would always be the top candidate. That's the assumption.
My community is a sitting duck right now because there's 64 counted million of us in this country with the buying power of $3.4 trillion a year. But they're not just getting rid of criminals, like they say. I'm a threat. So now they're getting rid of all of us as communities of voting communities because the new numbers for the Trump administration came out. And what is the numbers that he wants out of this country? Because now he's shown that, hey, we put you in power, we can take you down. So this is a direct hit to democracy.
If I could very quickly, you mentioned democracy. You know, our nation was founded on the principle of democracy, right? So, but it depends on who's in power, right? We've always been my good friend mentioned that we're a nation, you know, our future is diversity. Our past has always been diversity. But the question is, who's in power? You know, we had a very diverse country. We've always had a very diverse country since Europeans arrived. Europeans, Native Americans, Africans arrived. That's very diverse, right? However, enslavement and those that have power and rule created the gulf, the great gulf between the haves and the have-nots.
The number of people in this country that are transgender and the amount of attention that it gets is crazy. And to center it in the conversation on a community that is already so incredibly vulnerable is just criminal.
If you take a simple concept of why DEI is important based on economic prosperity alone, what we know to be true is that, and research has shown this, that every organization that has greater diversity in its workforce has a more profitable business.
Do you believe that diversity is a benefit?
I think unity, especially in times of trouble, when a nation and a society are faced with challenges, I think that you get the unity should be at a premium.
What we have to do is bake it in. And so when you talk about Target and all of these other corporations who've rolled back DEIA, it's because it was never baked into their systems anyway. It became a catchphrase. Everybody wanted to respond to Black Lives Matter or George Floyd, and so they just put frosting on their mission statement, a DEIA statement, so it was easy to roll it back, right?
What we must not do is to decide that other group of powerless people are somehow our problem, that they're in our way. They are not in our way, nor are we, and I'm speaking as a Black woman, nor are we in their way. Every group, yes, have different set of concerns, different issues, a different history, no doubt about it. But we should never lack the capacity to realize that their issues and their concerns should matter to us.
It is going to take people to support the safety net that's going to be ripped away, for people to stand up and be part of that fight who are not used to it.
We've got some fighters in the fight today, right? I believe that there is a majority of folk, and this is the hope that I have to have, one, as a woman of faith, but two, because I believe that humanity ultimately will prevail.
And I believe that DEIA is resilient through the course of time, regardless if it's immigration laws, it's civil rights, ADA, regardless it's the LGBTQ rights that we see now, veterans' rights, youth, those who are just as involved. We're not going back, and it's resilient, and diversity will always win.
I think it's hard